Resuming debate, the honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, as always, it's a great honour to stand in this House and represent the people of Timmins, James Bay, and I never take this honour lightly in the task that they have given me to do. I also say, Mr. Speaker, there is no role that we as parliamentarians can take that is more important than the decisions that have to be made in putting men and women of our armed forces into harm's way in a foreign theatre. Mr. Speaker, since I've been here, I've been through many of these debates and many of these motions. And over my time here, I've been fed a heavy diet of jingoism and rah-rah and two-dimensional claims that, if you look back in the light of day, did not stand up. And whenever we have these debates, we need to think about what it is that we're being called upon to do. I would like to say that what concerns me here is that we have, once again, a reactive policy about a region that is the most explosive in the world. This has been the unfortunate response over the last dozen or so years of not having a proactive, clear direction, and it has put our soldiers in harm's way, and it's added to the destabilization of an already crisis-ridden region. Nobody, Mr. Speaker, is arguing against the monstrosity of the group called ISIL. We don't need to compare the torture porn stories of what that awful group has done. What we need to do is say, what is the best way that we as a nation, with a proud military history, but also a proud nation-building legacy, can do in this fight? What really disturbs me about the present Liberal government is that they're not being truthful to Canadians. When they talk about pulling the planes out, but now the fight's going to be, as the minister said today in the House, the fight will be won on the ground. The targets will be found on the ground. This is an expansion of a combat mission. And it is important, if you are going to have a combat mission, to say it is a combat mission. That's the first part of being honest with Canadian people. And once you've identified what that mission is, then you can start to talk about the parameters of the mission and the goals of the mission. But to be completely vague and misrepresent what our soldiers will be doing on the ground is to do a disservice to this House, and it will lead to long-term consequences. You know, Mr. Speaker, I remember back in 2006 when we had the first debates on the mission into Kandahar. And what drove the Paul Martin government at that time was the pressure from the United States for having made the wise decision not to go into Desert Storm that was widely supported by the Conservative caucus, the Alliance Party, and their wild acclaim about how we had to go save civilization by getting ourselves involved in this illegal war in Iraq. We commend the previous government for not going in there, because it was that wrong-headed invasion that created so much of the instability and horrific death levels, and created the grounds that we see for groups like ISIS today. But as a result of having offended the Bush administration at the time, the previous Liberal government was under pressure to show that we could be good allies, and that was the sense. And we heard that, you know, to be playing with the big boys, we had to do our part. And so we voted in this House to send our soldiers into Kandahar without a clear understanding of what was on the ground in Kandahar. And our soldiers went in to the toughest parts of that firefight. And we, in this House, again, had all kinds of language that this was nation building, but we didn't even know what was happening on the ground. We had no forward-looking vision. And the New Democratic Party at the time said, what are the targets in terms of the goals to show that we've actually succeeded here? And we asked another important question at the time. Who are our allies on the ground? Where are our allies? Because we went into Kandahar alone. And at that time, I remember being fed lines like, oh, it's about putting boots on the ground. You know, and they threw the Neville Chamberlain thing around. Oh, the NDP, they're being like the 21st century Neville Chamberlain. And what the job of Parliament should have been is to say, yes, where were our allies going into Kandahar? So we now see today Major General David Fraser, who commanded the military's alliance into mission in 2006, has said that the West made a serious mistake in going in to fight the Taliban. I was actually very surprised at his statements, and he said we didn't learn the wrong-headed lessons of Iraq. So this was the general charge by Canada to go in there. And this is not to denigrate in any way our efforts to fight what was a brutal and awful regime, or the incredible work that our men and women did under really difficult conditions and made us all very proud. But this Parliament failed those soldiers because we didn't have a sense of the clear objectives. So to have Major General tell us today, well, we didn't do what we were supposed to have done, and now we have more instability. I fast forward, Mr. Speaker, to Libya and the vote we had in the House on the bombing mission in Libya. And at the time we were going to stand as a House united because there was such deep concern about what was happening on the ground in Libya in terms of potential killing and atrocities by the Gaddafi regime. But nobody in the West had any real clue what was really happening on the ground in Libya. So we thought, well, we'll bomb them, and then suddenly things will be okay. And then we turned our attention away. The mission was over, mission accomplished. And now we have a completely destabilized situation in Libya, which is very close to the southern belly of our European allies. We completely failed. You cannot go and bomb another country without a plan on the ground. What is it going to look like in the long term? And this is where I plead with my Liberal colleagues for the incredible vision that was set forward in the 20th century with Mike Pearson, that Canada was going to play a role, that we were going to be the nation builder. We weren't just going to be the little brother went along with the gang. That Canada established a reputation that was very, very unique at the time. And unfortunately, I feel we've been failing in this mission because it's like we've developed this attention deficit disorder on international affairs. An issue will come up for a little bit. We think we've dealt with it. We'll bomb them. We'll send in the planes, and then we'll move on. And so now we have an extremely destabilized situation in Libya. And so then when the ISIS onslaught happened in Mosul and the horrific slaughter started, we went there. We sent members from each party to go to Iraq, in northern Iraq, to find out what role Canada should play. And at that time, the allies on the ground in Iraq said they didn't need Canada in a bombing mission. They needed Canada to help with the humanitarian crisis they were dealing with. That was what they asked for. But we went in and started the bombing mission in Iraq without any clear idea, again, who our allies were on the ground. And then we extended it to Syria, where we have even less knowledge. And so the present Prime Minister said, no, we're going to pull the planes. And I think that was a wise move. But now we're going to be expanding the mission in Iraq. And, you know, in the last Parliament when we were debating this, I asked my honourable colleagues in the Conservative government at the time, what's the plan? Simple question. What's the plan? What are our objectives and who are our allies on the ground? And they shouted to me and they said, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to kill bad guys. That's not a foreign policy. There is no shortage of bad guys over there. My question is, who are the good guys? So let's look at our allies. We could say, well, we have Saudi Arabia. Those are our allies. Saudi Arabia, which has completely destabilized the region in terms of creating the conflict of this Sunni-Shia proxy war in Yemen, in northern Iraq. Canada is sending billions of dollars in military aid to Saudi Arabia that's already being used on the ground. Our weapons are being used in the Yemeni war on both sides. The Saudis, their human rights record is horrific and have also caused untold economic damage to Canada, but trying to beat us in this oil war they've declared. But those are our allies on the ground. So now we're getting ourselves into a Sunni-Shia conflict in Iraq, where we have no clue of what the outcome is at. Now let's look at our friends the Kurds and Turkey. Turkey is a NATO ally. I refer you to The Guardian, November 18, 2015, that talked about the key groups on the ground who can fight ISIS, the PPK, the Kurdish Democratic Union. They're the ones who can take ISIS out. But it says, quote, in the wake of the murderous attacks in Paris, we can expect Western heads of state to do what they've always done, declare total and unremitting war on those who brought it about, but they actually don't mean it. They've had the means to uproot and destroy Islamic State within their hands for a year now. They're simply refusing to make use of it. In fact, as the world watched leaders making statements of implacable resolve at the G20 summit, these same leaders are hobnobbing with Turkey's President Recep Erdogan, a man whose tacit political, economic, and even military support has contributed to ISIS's ability to perpetuate the atrocities in Paris, not to mention an endless stream of atrocities in the Middle East. Madam Speaker, Canadians deserve better than the mishmash of excuses we're getting from this government. We're sending our men and women to war. We have to do better, and we owe it to them. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member from Scarborough Agincourt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my friend from Timmins, James Bay, for his contribution to the debate. And I take to heart much of what he said. In particular, in my address in this place a few days ago, I raised many of the same issues that my friend from Timmins, James Bay, raised. In particular, I raised concerns with respect to a post-conflict scenario or post-conflict era in which, for example, bombing in Libya has now led to a profoundly difficult situation on the ground. But I want to ask my friend, does he believe that we should go back to a Pearsonian view, to one in which we have that type of mission that took place when it was brought forth by this side of the House, by the government at the time, by Mike Pearson, back in the 50s and 60s? Or are we in a different era? And does he support, for example, some of the other initiatives that the government has brought in this motion, which talk about investment in diplomatic initiatives in the region and investing in humanitarian aid and other initiatives that can provide the basis for a more stable region in the long run?
Honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank my honourable colleague for that excellent question. And I think the issue of how do we make the Mike Pearson vision in the 21st century is what we really need to be looking at. Part of that is having a long-term vision. And it's simply, you cannot do it by misrepresenting an extension of a combat mission. That's why we're there first and foremost. We are there as part, not under a UN mandate. That's first off. If we were under a UN mandate, there's a huge role Canada can play. There's a huge role. But given our recent track record and our lack of ability to actually look beyond the short-term goals, we are leaving ourselves in a situation for long-term war without having the credibility that we're going to be going in there afterwards as the nation builder. Nobody's going to believe it. So I'd ask my honourable colleague, this is a good discussion, but we need to be honest about the parameters of how we're engaging there.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The honourable member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his speech. He has highlighted, and of course we all agree, that it's a complex region. Really, there's a lot of complexity in terms of different interests and factions. But I wonder what he thinks about the idea of collective security in particular. Now, Canada has been attacked by Daesh. Our ally France has been attacked in a significant way by Daesh, and I would argue that we have an obligation to respond because of our collective security commitments. Yes, it's complicated. Yes, we have to do our best to think about where we go from here, but the reality is that we have been attacked, and it is appropriate that we respond and support our allies as well. What are his thoughts on the principle of collective security?
Le député de Timmins, James.
The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
For his excellent question. The issue of collective security and our role on the international stage is a fundamental question for Parliament. I would take exception to say that ISIS came to our shores, as the former Prime Minister claimed, and attacked us. I was here when that gunman came. That was a man suffering from severe mental illness who tried to get himself arrested in a McDonald's with a stick. And to claim that this was a foreign force that landed on our shores and attacked our nation, I think diminishes the tragedy of what happened and the loss of such a powerful young man as Corporal Cirillo. And it also means that we can't just jump every time someone with a gun stands up and is crazy. That's not collective security. That's using these tragedies as an excuse to further other aims. And I believe that Canada as a nation is bigger than that. And we will only be bigger than that if we do not give in to that kind of misrepresentation.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable.
The honourable member for Sherbrooke. A brief question, please. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for his speech. He spoke a bit about the history of our country in this matter, and I'm wondering if he thinks, like I do, that a mission without a definite end is problematic. And if this is one of the errors we've committed in the past, is it one that we are committing here again because there isn't a defined end? A brief answer from the member for Timmins James Bay.
Madam Speaker, I was raised by my grandmother. She never got over the horrors of what happened in her neighborhood when every young man on her street were killed. And she said to me all growing up, she says, Charlie, never fall for politicians who send young boys to be killed. That's the issue here. We have to be honest with Canadians. We're sending them into a combat mission. We can't say anything else because we are sending young men and women into harm's way. And I hear my grandmother's voice every time I hear the jingoism that sometimes runs around this house. We have a responsibility to be truthful. We have a responsibility to have a long-term plan. And we have a responsibility to come to Parliament with a clear plan of getting in and getting out and building a long-term sense of stability and peace in that region. Thank you very much.